Hello, everyone. We are hoping that this is streaming live on LinkedIn and YouTube. We're going to be talking about today how to be a social entrepreneur without burning out.
Mm.
Um, because I'm particularly interested in how socially driven, socially engaged founders and leaders are perhaps more prone to burning out than others. And joining me to think about this today is the lovely Dr. Claire Plumbly. And bear with us because for both of us, this is our first LinkedIn Live. We have
Yeah.
no idea if it's working, if it's streaming. If it is, you should, in theory, be able to write some comments and then I will be able to see those. So if you are watching us, come into the chat and say hi. Tell us who you are and maybe why you're interested in this topic as well, why you're joining us.
Yeah.
Um, the reason we're doing this live is because Claire and I have recorded a podcast episode. So, as well as a coach, I am a podcaster. I have a podcast called Do Good and Do Well. And I invited Claire onto that to talk about burnout and burnout from the perspective of what that feels like for a founder or a leader of a socially engaged organization, someone who cares, who wants to make a difference. And we'll talk a little bit more about the podcast later. But I wonder if we can get started, Claire, by maybe if you could share what you see as burnout so that we feel that we're all on the same page of what we're talking about when we say burnout.
Yes. And obviously, we go to town with this in the podcast, but I differentiate a little bit between what high functioning burnout might be, where we're masking how much we're struggling, and then what clinical burnout is, which is when the body kind of forces a stop, physical or mental health issues kind of just causing us to kind of crash, be off work. But actually, it is the spectrum. And within that, you get a syndrome typically of the three things: kind of physical and emotional exhaustion, this kind of disconnection from the people and things around you, where you're not feeling like you're really engaged with anything properly, and then you get this reduced personal accomplishment where you kind of feel like you're bad mom, bad psychologist, bad change maker, not being as effective, and your self-esteem just plummets.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the reason why I'm particularly interested in this topic is because these kind of conversations are the conversations that I'm having in my coaching work and just with people around me as well. And I suppose the thing that I'm noticing is that on the one hand, people who are social entrepreneurs, leaders of purpose-led organizations, they have a real sense of purpose. They feel quite motivated. They're connected to others. They have this real strong sense of social justice. So they're really aware of their core values and living those values. They've got a real sense of meaning. And they might have experienced some form of social injustice themselves, which is one of the drivers for why they're doing the work that
Yeah.
they're doing.
Yeah.
So I sort of see that, and we know that that's really good for us. It's good for us to have that sense of meaning um, and purpose, and also to not just be thinking about ourselves, but to be thinking about other people, connected to that sort of bigger than self thinking. But then on the other hand, the other thing I notice is that they can often be helpers, the rescuers, the doers, the problem
Mhm.
solvers, maybe people pleasers, recovering people pleaser here. It's hard for them when they're not seeing an impact. So they're not
Yeah.
necessarily getting that sense of satisfaction or achievement because they're not seeing the impact of their work. They are aware of these really big global issues and they often really feel those as well. And also community issues, it's sort of that micro and
Yeah.
the macro. Um, but also, I think, and maybe this is skewed a bit for me because I've come from the not-for-profit sector, charity, arts, education.
Okay.
where there is a lack of funding, where everyone is overstretched, where there is a massive overwhelm. Um, and so that's a really tough place to be. And if we think maybe, you've started this organization or you're doing this work because you've experienced it yourself, then you're often being reminded of something that's quite personal to you as well. So I
There's so much there, Sarah.
sorry, we
I
haven't
was
got
like,
that long.
here's all the things.
There's all the things.
And
But
but you
this is
probably
what
seeing it all your work all the time. Like you've probably just gone, right, and this was my morning clinic.
exactly. And is that spectrum? And I suppose, I don't think we're going to answer that question today around, well, maybe we are, I don't know. But, because of those things, are social entrepreneurs more prone to burnout? So tell us, in your experience, Claire.
Yeah, I mean, those we think in therapy often psychologists would talk more about risk factors, and there's lots of risk factors there that would lend themselves towards, burning out. For example, you've got potentially the kind of background of adversity or trauma for an individual, like you're saying, kind of potentially the reason that you've got this passion for something might have come from a place of personally being affected. So you've already kind of got that as a starting point. It makes it really hard then to recognize and listen in, tune into your body when your body's saying, I'm really tired and I need a break, because you've kind of got this really strong motivation to keep going. And, typically we want to stop when we've solved it. And something like this, you don't really get to that point. And we're not very good and taught very well to kind of practice pausing and celebrating how far we've come. So this is some of the issues. Sorry, I'm not organized my answer for this, but the other risk factors are kind of, if you're working in isolation, so having a community around you, and if you're working in a way where people aren't showing you gratitude for what you're doing, which is quite sometimes you're kind of plodding on and doing some really important work, but it's not very easy for people to kind of grasp what it is you're doing and go, wow. And so these are all kind of further risk factors, kind of burning out, as well as the obvious things like too much to do, not enough time or resources to do them, because then that causes you to kind of have no energy, and just feel like you're kind of running on empty a lot of the time. And then you've got the problem that a lot of the stuff that I kind of when I listened back to the podcast, and what jumped out at me was how much of your identity is tied up with what you're doing. You use the phrase bigger than self thinking. And so if you're always used to thinking at that level, it's really hard to bring it back to just, but what do I need and what's important to
Mm,
me? And actually, we both in the podcast talk about how lost a lot of people feel. They're so busy doing this big work. When you kind of come back down to like that, but what do you need or want? People look at you with this kind of blank. I don't even know. I haven't even had the luxury of allowing myself to think like that. Um, so how hard it is for a social entrepreneur to pause, reflect, take their foot off the gas, because then who am I? What am I doing? That's
yeah.
what holds me together, that bigger than self thinking.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the word that popped up then as you were speaking was the word guilt. I hear this a lot. Like, not only can I maybe not tune in to what I want, or even, what my body is telling me it
Mm.
needs. But if I do manage to do that, then the guilt that comes from focusing on myself and not this big uh pervading piece of work is a lot.
Yes. So that is that guilt is often what then dictates our decisions, and we don't tend to pause and think, is this warranted, this level of guilt, or is it coming from a different place? And quite often guilt's a tricky one, because it's something we're socialized to feel if we don't, especially females aren't doing performing in a certain way that we think our society, well, we've been told we should be doing as well, holding like the nurturing kind of position, for example, doing these things that we think we should be doing. So sometimes in therapy, for example, you might come back and help people to go, okay, you might be getting this guilt, but if you've done all that work to think about what your values are, what's important to you, and how to tune into your body, there might be times when you have to ride the guilt out. You're bringing it for the ride. You're gonna sit it out, and gradually we kind of begin to see that that guilt doesn't need to be the place that we're making the decisions from.
Mm. Yeah, and I think you described that really beautifully in your book, which we haven't actually mentioned yet. One of the reasons why I invited Claire is because she's actually written a book on this subject, so she knows her stuff. And in that sort of the way that you talk about being able to come back to yourself to feel more grounded. I describe it as that wise sort of Jedi version of yourself, where you can make those decisions based in uh, where you haven't been hijacked, and you talk about regulating your nervous system so that you can do that. And I guess recognizing when you're feeling that guilt, what are the sorts of things you might be saying to yourself, what are the sorts of things you might be feeling, and if you can
Yeah.
recognize those signs, then doing some of that. Well, you give loads of really practical support in the book as well. But doing some of those activities can then really help you make decisions that are going to be good for you, and then ultimately good for the people that you're working for, and good for the problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm sure in coaching, what you find is that when people are burned out, they're not able to make those huge, big strategic decisions because they're just overwhelmed with the anxiety of it all, or have that kind of clear thinking or creative thought. All of that goes out the window when we're burnt out because you
Mm,
don't have access to the parts of the brain where it's housed. You're in survival mode. So
yeah.
your decisions will be coming from a fear-based place. Your threat system is dictating, do this thing to stay safe. And so yeah, it's very hard then if that's what's motivating your day-to-day decisions. Um, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's hard for the people that are around you as well when that's happening. Hard for them to see that, but also what might be the impact on them if if you're leading from a place of fear, that has a massive impact. Um, there's so much that we could talk about. I feel like we could actually be on this for the rest of the day, but I'm noticing time. Um, when we did the podcast, I was just you've picked up on something that really resonated with you. I think the thing that I really went away with, it was a really practical piece of advice, which I
Mhm.
kind of knew and I've done before, but it's somehow been the lines have blurred again, as you know, as you get busier um
I
and
well,
you
I think stuff does. I think you need to constantly be receiving these messages and surrounding yourself with people who sing from the same hymn sheet, because
yeah.
otherwise life is you're constantly swimming upstream, and so every so often the tide just kind of pulls you back again.
Yeah, I think you're right. And like having your peers, having friends, having coaches, having therapists who
Yeah.
can support you, that external support system is so important. I think the thing that I have changed since we had that conversation is the way that I close off a work day and move into my evening life.
Great.
So
Okay.
as you might describe it. So, we talked about ritual and you gave some really brilliant uh, exercises to do. And so what I've started to do is things like it sounds really, really simple, but like closing my tabs, getting rid of all the tabs, actually closing my computer down because well, that's better for the environment as well and better for me.
Yeah.
um, I have so my office is also the dog's bedroom, so I can't close the door
Okay.
completely, which is one of the things you suggested, or you suggested locking the door as well, which I thought was brilliant. But I do turn the lights off, close the curtains, do a quick tidy of my desk, look at my little notebook that tells me the three things I need to do the following day, um, and beyond that, have a shower, change into different clothes. Like I've just changed up the way that I finish it because it felt so blurry. I think especially if you're working from home as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that's just been, yeah, I used to do it, then I got busy, then I stopped doing it. But it's been so helpful. just that those simple actions, it's
'Cause
just felt really useful.
I think a lot of people resonate. I go more into it in your podcast, but when you think about the nervous systems as gears, and that you're kind of, you can't, it's like coming off the motorway in sixth gear and trying to kind of go into your evening in, a 20 mile per hour zone, but still with your work head, literally work clothes on. Um, and so you're kind of doing all the things you can to help your system kind of switch down into the right
Mm.
place. So I love that. That's great. Have you managed to consistently stick with that? And have you told
Yeah,
people what you're doing in your house as well?
mostly. No, I haven't, but if they're watching this, they did say they were gonna watch this, and now they know. Uh, by the way, if anyone is watching this and you can write a comment in the, chat, do so we can, see what you're thinking.
I've just had a little look. There's one comment, but it
Oh.
says worth attending. That's nice.
Fab.
Um,
Yeah, I don't really know how all that works, but we'll figure out. Yeah, so I think there is, I suppose those are the little things that you can do to keep yourself as regulated as possible. But what would you suggest if, someone has gone way past that ability to do that? What would they need to do, or what can they do?
it's really hard because if someone's still vaguely functioning, they probably aren't finding it hard to kind of really admit this to themselves. I think that high functioning frenzy where you kind of feel like you're spinning out of control. I think if you're recognizing any of that, then you do need to try and find a way to stop. And we need to kind of usually think about, say, if they're in therapy with me, I might be saying, this is a time to take time off sick, for example. And
Mm,
that might not be so easy when you're running your own business, but thinking about who is in your team that you can just let them know that you do genuinely need to press a bit of a reset button, because if you don't do that, your body will take a stop for you at some point, and it really won't be a convenient time. There's never a convenient time. But remember that your brain, where you are right now, if you are in this really frazzled, burnt out state, will be making you feel like it's all completely impossible, much worse, because that's the nature of the thoughts when we get to that place. Become very rigid, very catastrophic, unable to kind of see past the problem.
mm,
And so that is a sign of where your nervous system is at, your autonomic nervous system. It's not necessarily completely true, the full picture. And the thing is, you're finding it hard to get out of your perspective to another place. So yeah, like leaning into who is available, who you can just say, actually, I do need to stop, and I can't work out how that's going to look right now. Don't try and do it all on your own. This is the hard thing. We try and I think I can fix it. I'm burdening others. But if you think about, humans were meant to be interdependent, not independent. We're
mm,
designed, our physiology is designed to do this. And if you think about how you felt when others have reached out, have you felt like that's a burden, or do you kind of, you often, most people are happy to help, aren't they, and be supportive. So who would that look like if that's really
mm,
really hard for you? But yeah, you can't really see the wood for the trees if you're still in the thick of it.
mm. Yeah, feels like those small steps, even maybe the beginning is identifying that those are the thoughts you're having, just
Yeah.
becoming aware of that. Yeah, then finding someone or some people that you can, I think that word reset can be really helpful. It doesn't feel as judgmental in a way
Hmm.
on ourselves, I think, as much
Mm.
as like other people. Um, and it made me, just another thought that's popped up, going back to what I said about, um, if you're a social entrepreneur, or you've witnessed some kind of social injustice, and you're trying to make it better for others, it feels to me that doing things like, or having ongoing therapy, or being part of listening circles, or having coaching where you can unpack some of that stuff that's happening for you, so you can start to become really aware of what's your stuff. I mean, I'm thinking about this because this is what I do as a coach in terms
Yeah.
of supervision. Being able to go to my supervisor and say, had this coaching conversation, and I realized that in my brain I was just thinking about my own experience because this happened to me. And so I think in a way, I don't think I connected these dots before, but maybe if you're a social entrepreneur who's had some of that lived experiences, that ongoing support, can really help you unpack so that you can lead from a place of
Yeah.
presence.
I think a bit of a model in our culture of you go and do the thing for a short time, then you're covered, and then you kind of go back to your old pattern, like or exercise quite often. You go for a short burst before your holiday, and then that's it. Whereas if you kind of think about times when you've done something a bit more consistently, like have had a regular PT or a regular kind of anything really, you're much more likely to maintain and have a good kind of well-being, generally balance. um Having a space to work through what comes up live as it's coming up before it gets into more of a, when it starts as a niggle, you're trying to think through and having the space for that and knowing you've got that regularly rather than waiting until it becomes like a real pain point.
Yeah, and giving yourself permission for that. And if you're writing funding applications, maybe adding that in as a line.
I
So,
love that. Yeah.
coaching,
Yeah.
therapy, support.
Is
Because
that not normally written in? Oh my
oh
gosh, yes, that's
no,
such a good idea, Sarah.
I think it's about, because if we want leaders that are leading from presence and being, and
Yes.
having healthy boundaries and leading effectively, they need that support. So yeah, there might be mentoring, but I feel like it's more than that. I feel like, well, obviously I believe in coaching and I believe in therapy. So yeah, let's start doing that. I wanted to just put this up. This is really fancy. You ready?
Go for it.
Ta-da! So on the screen should be a QR code, which you can look. You can access the podcast. So we've got the podcast that you can find on all of your favorite podcast platforms, but also I have a YouTube channel, so you can actually watch us talking if you prefer that as well. And that comes with subtitles. So we would love you to go and listen to that episode, and then also to let us know what you think and what has resonated. And if you found anything particularly helpful or you want to add to the conversation, we would really love that, because we think this stuff is really important. Claire, before we close, is there anything else you wanted to pick up about what we've talked about? Podcast?
Not only that anyone listening obviously has a value around their self-care, and I think just listen to that, because I think it can be a bit of a whisper and it can be easily crowded out by all the demands and needs. But you know when we value ourselves and put ourselves in stage, like you say, everybody else around us benefits, because that compassion that flows very easily towards others, that will be supported if you're kind of allowing that compassion to flow into yourself as well. And so that's what this is. So yeah, go and listen to the podcast as a starting point, and just keep it as an ongoing project alongside all your other really exciting projects. You as a project, so that's still exciting.
Yeah, exactly. And I would add, go and buy Claire's book. Honestly, it's
I'll hold it up
there's
here.
loads
On
of
the thing.
really accessible theory, like understanding what is going on in our body, what's happening, and then the sort of the other half, I guess, is much more practical, looking at what you can actually do, ways you can connect with people. I mean, there's so much stuff in there. It's really helpful, and I've got lots of notes in the margin.
Oh,
I
thank you,
think I'm
Sarah.
going to try,
That's
but
nice.
really great. Right, we've just done our first LinkedIn Live, Claire.
Well done, us.
Whoop,
Pushed
whoop.
ourselves out of our comfort zone and did it.
Well,
Let's hope
it's
it was actually. I don't think it appeared on mine, unfortunately. I think I messed it up, but
oh gosh.
oh well.
Well, let's see.
I'll
And
share
maybe we just had a really nice conversation between the two of us.
it.
Thank you, Claire, and look after yourselves, everybody.